In 1933, a New York food columnist wrote that families were stretching a single pound of macaroni across 4 nights of dinner. Just 1 pound, 20 cents at the grocer. They did it with techniques most Americans have completely forgotten. Number 14 on this list cost less than 4 cents a serving. Number 22 was so common in the Midwest that newspapers printed it in the margins next to the funnies. And number 3 contains an ingredient combination that sounds insane until you taste it. These 30 pasta dinners kept American families alive through the worst economic decade this country ever saw. Then we threw them away the moment we could afford steak. Hit subscribe before we start. What you are about to hear might change the way you look at that box of pasta in your cupboard. Let's count down. Number 30, plain buttered noodles. A pound of egg noodles cost about 10 cents in 1934. A stick of butter, when there was butter, ran about 30 cents and lasted a week. Your great-grandmother would boil those noodles in salted water, drain them, and toss them with whatever fat was on hand. Sometimes butter, more often margarine. Sometimes just bacon grease saved in the can on the back of the stove. A heavy crack of black pepper went over the top, and that was supper. Children ate it without complaint because the noodles were warm and the kitchen was warm and the bowl was full. In a Detroit tenement in 1934, this fed a family of 5 for under 20 cents. Today we serve buttered noodles to sick toddlers and sneer at the simplicity. Back then, this was Tuesday night. Number 29, macaroni and ketchup. This is the one that makes modern foodies wince. But during the Depression, when canned tomatoes were too expensive and tomato paste was a luxury most pantries did not stock, ketchup did the work both of them refused to do. A bottle of Heinz cost about 15 cents in 1935 and lasted a month if you were careful. Mothers cooked a pot of elbow macaroni, drained it, and stirred in 3 or 4 heavy spoonfuls of ketchup, along with a knob of margarine and a pinch of salt. The whole thing turned a soft pink orange and tasted sweet and tangy and deeply familiar. Children loved it. Some families called it pink macaroni. Others called it Hoover sauce. By any name, it was the meal that appeared on Wednesday when the icebox was empty and payday was still 2 days off. Number 28, spaghetti with stewed tomatoes. Before jarred marinara took over American kitchens, this was the closest thing to an Italian dinner that most working families ever ate. A can of stewed tomatoes cost a dime in 1936. Mothers would heat them in a saucepan, break them up with the side of a wooden spoon, season them with salt and pepper and a pinch of dried oregano if they had it, and pour the whole thing over a plate of spaghetti, cooked soft. There was no garlic, no basil, no olive oil. There was only the bright acid of tomato, the chew of the noodles, and the certainty that everyone at the table was going to eat. The smell of warm tomatoes filled the kitchen the way coffee fills a diner. It was modest, but it was a meal that felt like Sunday on a Tuesday night. Number 27, bacon grease spaghetti. Every Depression kitchen kept a tin can on the back of the stove, half full of saved bacon grease. On lean nights, that can become dinner. Mothers cooked a pound of spaghetti, drained it, and tossed the hot noodles directly into a skillet with a tablespoon of cold, rendered bacon fat. The fat melted instantly, coating every strand. A clove of crushed garlic, if there was one, went in for 30 seconds. A little salt and pepper, and the meal was done. The smoky, salty, rich flavor of the cured pork came through every bite without using a single piece of meat. A pound of spaghetti was 9 cents. The grease was free, already paid for from breakfast a week earlier. Italian families on Mulberry Street made this. Polish families in Chicago made this. Nobody owned the recipe. Recipe because everybody needed it. Number 26, noodles with cottage cheese. This was the Eastern European answer to a kitchen with almost nothing in it. A bowl of hot egg noodles, a spoonful of cottage cheese stirred straight in until it melted at the edges, a knob of butter, a heavy hand of black pepper, sometimes a pinch of caraway seed. That was the entire recipe. Cottage cheese cost 12 cents a pint in 1937 and was the cheapest dairy on the shelf because nobody fancied it. The warm noodles softened the curds. The butter pulled it all together. The pepper made it taste like food. In Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and the Polish neighborhoods of Detroit, this was the supper that mothers made when the husband had been laid off again and there was nothing in the cupboard but flour, salt, and patience. Number 25, macaroni with peas. A can of peas cost 8 cents. A box of macaroni cost 9 cents. Together, those two pantry staples fed a family of 5 for less than a quarter, and they did it without anybody at the table feeling cheated. Mothers cooked the macaroni, drained it, and tossed it with the peas, their canning liquid included for moisture, plus a tablespoon of butter and a fistful of grated cheese, if there was any in the icebox. The peas brightened up the pale macaroni. The cheese made it feel rich. The whole bowl came together in 11 minutes from cold pot to hot supper. This was the pitch that mothers made when the children had to be fed before church choir practice. It was fast, it was filling, and it asked almost nothing of the cook. Number 24, sour cream noodles. Polish and Hungarian immigrants brought this dish across the Atlantic in steerage and never let it go. A pound of white egg noodles cooked al dente, drained, and tossed with a half cup of sour cream, a spoonful of butter, and a pinch of salt. That was it. The sour cream warmed against the hot noodles and turned silky, coating each ribbon in something that tasted far more luxurious than its price tag suggested. A small tub of sour cream cost about 15 cents in the 1930s. The dish appeared in Slavic neighborhoods from Cleveland to Buffalo to the coal towns of Pennsylvania. Old men remember their mothers making it on Friday nights when meat was forbidden and money was scarce, and they remember the bowl being scraped clean every single time. Number 23, poppy seed noodles. This is the dish that has almost completely vanished from American memory. Wide egg noodles tossed in melted butter and sprinkled heavily with poppy seeds and a spoonful of sugar served hot in a deep bowl. It tasted like nothing else on earth. The poppy seeds gave the noodles a nutty, almost floral quality. The sugar lifted everything. The butter held it all together. Eastern European Jews and Polish Catholics in Brooklyn and Chicago made this both as a side dish and on poor nights as the entire supper. A small jar of poppy seeds cost 18 cents and lasted a year. The dish was filling, it was sweet enough to feel like a treat, and it lived in 1,000 handwritten cookbooks that got thrown away when grandmothers died and grandchildren did not know the language they were written in. Number 22, garlic spaghetti. Italian-American kitchens kept this dish alive, even when everything else got stripped away. 1 pound of spaghetti cooked just past al dente. 3 cloves of garlic, sliced thin, warmed slowly in a 1/4 cup of olive oil, or more often, whatever fat was available. The garlic browned at the edges without burning. The hot pasta went into the pan with a splash of starchy cooking water, a pinch of red pepper flakes, if there were any, a fistful of stale breadcrumbs toasted in the same fat went over the top in place of cheese. This was the meal that fed Italian immigrants from Boston to San Francisco when there was no money for tomatoes, no money for cheese, and no money for meat. It was their oldest recipe and their most honest one. Number 21, spaghetti with milk gravy. Now this is where it gets strange. In rural Appalachia, where Italian immigrants were rare and tomatoes were a summer luxury, families took the spaghetti the church gave them in relief boxes and topped it with what they knew, milk gravy, a tablespoon of bacon grease in the skillet, a spoonful of flour stirred in until pale gold, a cup of milk poured slowly while whisking, salt and a heavy hand of black pepper. Poured thick over a plate of spaghetti, the dish looked nothing like Italian food and tasted nothing like it either. It tasted like home. Mountain mothers in West Virginia and Kentucky served this without apology, and their children grew up thinking spaghetti was supposed to be white. They were not wrong, they were just from somewhere else. Pattern break. Here is where the truth about Depression pasta gets uncomfortable. American food companies spent the next 70 years convincing us that pasta needed to be expensive to be good. They sold us imported brands, jarred sauces full of sugar, fancy shapes, and gourmet toppings. The pasta dinners on this list cost less than 50 cents each in modern dollars when you factor everything in. They were not the meals you made because you were poor. They were the meals you made because they actually worked. Generations of immigrants survived on these dishes for one reason. Pasta is a vehicle. It carries whatever flavor you give it. Your great-grandmother knew that. Then the marketing departments at Ragu and Prego decided you needed to forget. Number 20, macaroni and government cheese. When the federal government started distributing surplus cheese in 5-pound blocks during the Depression, working families turned it into the cheapest hot meal the country had ever seen. A handful of grated government cheese melted into a pot of hot, drained macaroni with a splash of milk and a pat of margarine. That was it. The cheese was sharp and salty, and it melted into something almost obscenely rich. There was no roux. There was no breadcrumb topping. There was just hot pasta and orange cheese, and the smell of supper filling a kitchen that had been cold all afternoon. Government cheese kept feeding poor families straight through the 1980s, and the macaroni dish made from it appeared in school cafeterias, church basements, and trailer kitchens across rural America for 50 straight years. Number 19, mock chicken noodle soup. There was no chicken in this soup. There was barely any broth. What there was water, a bouillon cube, half an onion, a chopped carrot if you had one, a stalk of celery if you were lucky, and a fistful of broken-up egg noodles dropped in for the last 10 minutes. The bouillon cube cost 2 cents. The noodles cost 5 cents. The whole pot fed a family for under 15 cents and tasted against all odds like something a sick child would actually drink. Mothers in the Dust Bowl made this when the only protein in the house was hidden inside that little foil-wrapped cube. It looked like soup. It smelled like soup. It worked like soup. And in the worst years, that was all anybody could ask for. Number 18, macaroni with stewed onions. Onions were the cheapest vegetable in America during the Depression. A 5-pound bag cost 9 cents and lasted 3 weeks. Mothers learned to slice 3 large onions thin and to melt them slowly in a skillet with a tablespoon of bacon grease for 40 minutes until they collapsed into a sweet, jammy, deep brown tangle. Then they would pour those onions over a bowl of buttered macaroni and add a heavy crack of pepper. By the time they were done, the onions tasted nothing like onions. They tasted like meat. They tasted like a sauce that should have taken hours and cost dollars. Slow-cooked onion was the secret weapon of poverty cooking, and the dish disappeared the moment Americans could afford pre-made pasta sauce in jars. The flavor disappeared with it. Number 17, macaroni and tomatoes. This was the dish that fed the South. Cook elbow macaroni, drain it, and drop it back into the pot. Open a can of whole-peeled tomatoes, break the tomatoes up by hand, juice and all, and pour them over the macaroni. Add salt, pepper, a knob of bacon grease, and a pinch of sugar to cut the acid. Stir everything together over low heat until it comes to a low bubble. Spoon into bowls and eat with a soda biscuit. A can of tomatoes cost 12 cents in 1936. A box of macaroni cost 9 cents. This dish appeared in church cookbooks across Georgia, Mississippi, and Alabama, often listed without ingredients because everybody already knew. Today, home cooks have replaced it with jarred marinara and never looked back. That is the loss nobody notices. Number 16. Buttered noodles with breadcrumbs. When there was no cheese, there were breadcrumbs. Every Depression kitchen kept a jar of dried, crushed bread on the counter, made from heels and stale slices that nobody would eat. Mothers toasted those breadcrumbs in a skillet with a tablespoon of butter until they turned golden and nutty, then sprinkled them heavily over a bowl of buttered hot noodles. The crumbs added crunch. They added richness. They added a savory toasted flavor that mimicked the Parmesan that was sitting in some other family's kitchen across town. Italian grandmothers called this poor man's Parmesan and made it without shame. They knew what every cook eventually learns. Texture matters as much as flavor. A crumb is a kind of seasoning. The trick was knowing what to do with what you had. If you want a full collection of these recipes, I made a cookbook with 100 simple meals from this era. The link is in the description below. Number 15. Lima beans and noodles. Dried lima beans cost 10 cents a pound and could feed a family for 2 days. Mothers soaked them overnight, simmered them for an hour with an onion and a piece of salt pork, and tossed the cooked beans with a pound of white egg noodles, butter, and a heavy crack of black pepper. The starch from both the beans and the noodles thickened together into something almost creamy without a drop of cream. The salt pork gave the whole dish a deep, smoky flavor that lingered in the back of the mouth. This was peasant food from a dozen different countries collapsed into one Depression-era American supper. It filled bellies. It stretched $1. And it has nearly disappeared from American kitchens because nobody under 50 has eaten a properly cooked dried lima bean in their entire life. Number 14. Tomato macaroni soup. At less than 4 cents a serving, this was the cheapest hot meal in America. You opened a can of tomato soup, added a can of water, dropped in a handful of broken macaroni, and cooked it for 10 minutes, then finished with salt and pepper. That was the recipe. A can of Campbell's tomato soup cost 10 cents in 1937. The macaroni was already in the pantry. The whole pot cost 20 cents and fed 4 people. It tasted creamy, sweet, tangy, and deeply comforting in the way that only food made when you are 6 years old and home from school sick can taste. Mothers across the Midwest made this for lunch every Saturday. Kids ate it with a soda cracker crumbled in. Today, we throw the can in the cart without thinking. We have forgotten how clever it actually was. Number 13. Egg drop noodles. This was the dish that put protein on the table when there was no meat in the icebox. A pot of hot chicken bouillon broth, a fistful of broken thin spaghetti dropped in to cook, 2 beaten eggs poured in slowly while the broth boiled. The eggs turned to silky golden ribbons in the soup. A pinch of salt, a green onion if there was one, and the meal was done in 12 minutes. 2 eggs cost 6 cents. The noodles cost 3 cents. The bouillon was 2 cents. For under 15 cents, a family had a hot, protein-rich, deeply satisfying dinner that tasted like Chinese restaurant soup years before most Americans had ever eaten in one. Mothers improvised this without ever seeing a recipe, and their children grew up healthier for it. Number 12. Cabbage and noodles. Polish and Hungarian families called this haluski, and it was the supper that defined Eastern European poverty in America. Half a head of green cabbage, shredded thin, cooked slowly in a heavy skillet with butter and onion for 30 minutes until the cabbage caramelized at the edges and turned sweet and silky, tossed with a pound of cooked white egg noodles, salt, and an enormous amount of black pepper. That was the whole dish. A head of cabbage cost 6 cents. The dish was rich, sweet, savory, and impossibly filling. Slovak grandmothers in Pittsburgh made it every Friday during Lent. Polish mothers in Chicago made it every Wednesday. The dish crossed every Eastern European line because it solved every kitchen's problem at once: how to feed 7 people with almost nothing. Number 11. American chop suey. Despite the name, there was nothing Chinese about this dish. New England working families browned a half pound of ground beef with an onion in a heavy pot, added a can of tomato soup and a can of water, stirred in a pound of cooked elbow macaroni, and called it dinner. Some versions added a chopped green pepper. Some added a pinch of garlic powder. The result was a thick, beefy, sweet, tangy pasta that fed 6 people for under 60 cents in 1938. It appeared on every school cafeteria menu in Massachusetts for 80 straight years. It appeared at every church potluck from Bangor to Hartford. Then, somewhere around 1995, it quietly disappeared, replaced by frozen lasagna and spaghetti from a jar. An entire region's supper, gone in a single generation. Pattern break. Here is what nobody talks about. The pasta dinners on this list were not invented by chefs. They were invented by mothers standing at the stove with 3 children waiting at the table and 40 cents in the grocery jar. Every single recipe came from a moment of necessity. Every single technique was tested across 1,000 kitchens before it became tradition. When food companies finally got involved in the 1960s and the 1970s, they did not improve these dishes. They replaced them with shelf-stable, sugar-loaded, preservative-soaked imitations and convinced an entire country that the originals had been bad. They were not bad. They were free, or close to it. And that was exactly the problem. You cannot put a markup on knowledge that gets passed between mothers for nothing. Number 10. Pasta with pickled cabbage. Eastern European families kept a crock of homemade sauerkraut fermenting in the cellar all winter, and on the leanest nights of February, that crock became dinner. 2 cups of drained sauerkraut sautéed in a skillet with 1 tablespoon of butter and a chopped onion until the cabbage softened and the sharpness mellowed into something almost sweet. Tossed with 1 pound of cooked wide egg noodles and a heavy crack of black pepper. That was the meal. The probiotic-rich kraut gave the dish a tangy depth that nothing else could replicate. A homemade crock cost almost nothing to maintain. Modern nutritionists are now writing entire books about the benefits of fermented foods. Polish grandmothers in Buffalo were eating this for breakfast in 1934 and walking 3 miles to work afterward. Number 9. Macaroni salad. This was the supper that Sunday dinners turned into. Cooked elbow macaroni, a chopped hard-boiled egg, a finely diced rib of celery, a tablespoon of sweet pickle relish, salt, pepper, and just enough mayonnaise to bind everything together, served cold in a bowl. The whole thing cost 18 cents to make in 1939 and fed 4 adults as a complete light supper on hot summer evenings when nobody wanted to fire up the stove a second time. It appeared at every church picnic, every 4th of July, every funeral, and every Sunday potluck in America for 50 straight years. Today, we have forgotten that macaroni salad was ever a dinner. We treat it like a side. The mothers who invented it knew better. Number 8. Spaghetti pie. Leftover spaghetti was never thrown away. Mothers would beat 2 eggs with a splash of milk and a pinch of salt, pour the mixture over a skillet full of cold cooked spaghetti, cover the pan, and cook the whole thing slowly over low heat until the eggs set and the bottom turned golden brown and crisp. Flipped onto a plate, it looked like a dense yellow cake made of pasta. Sliced into wedges and served with whatever was left in the icebox, this was Italian-American breakfast, lunch, and supper, depending on the day. The recipe was never written down because every Italian grandmother knew it from memory. A single batch used up the leftovers and fed the family for free. Modern home cooks throw out leftover spaghetti. Their great-grandmothers would have wept. Number 7. American goulash. This was not Hungarian. This was American Depression cooking dressed up in a borrowed name. Half a pound of ground beef browned with an onion in a heavy pot. A can of diced tomatoes and a can of tomato sauce. A teaspoon of paprika, because the name demanded it. A pound of elbow macaroni, cooked directly in the same pot with extra water, until the pasta absorbed the sauce and the whole thing turned into something thick and rich and deeply orange. This was the original one-pot meal. It cost about 50 cents to make and fed 6 people with leftovers for the next day's lunch. Mothers across the Midwest made this every other Tuesday from 1935 until the 1980s. Then somebody invented Hamburger Helper, charged 3 times as much, and the homemade version vanished within a decade. Number 6. Tuna noodle without the soup. Before condensed soup turned every American casserole into a salt bomb, Depression-era tuna noodle was something different and arguably better. A can of tuna packed in oil, drained into a pot of cooked egg noodles, a handful of frozen peas when peas were available, a splash of milk, a spoonful of flour to thicken, a heavy hand of black pepper. The whole thing simmered for 5 minutes until it turned creamy and savory and rich without a single can of cream of mushroom anything. A can of tuna cost 13 cents in 1938. The whole meal cost under 30 cents and fed a family of 5. The taste was cleaner than the modern casserole, brighter, less artificial, more like food, and less like the inside of a vending machine. We traded down without realizing it. Pattern break. This is what the grocery industry does not want you to understand. The dishes coming up next are the most efficient pasta meals ever invented in this country. They use ingredients that cost almost nothing because nobody can mark them up. There is no premium brand of dried beans. There is no luxury edition of peanut butter. There is no high-end version of a hot pot of water and a fistful of pasta. That is exactly why these meals got buried under 60 years of advertising for boxed dinners and frozen entrees. The cheapest food in America has always been the food people forgot how to make. The next 5 recipes built this country. Then we paid corporations to take them away. Number 5. Hoover stew. Named after the president who watched the country starve, this was the meal that defined the worst years of the Depression. A pound of cooked elbow macaroni, a can of stewed tomatoes, a sliced hot dog or 2, a can of corn, a can of beans, if there were any in the cupboard, all simmered together in one pot until the whole thing's turned into a thick, sweet, smoky stew. Hot dogs cost 12 cents a pound in 1933. The whole meal came in under 40 cents and fed 8 people. Hooverville camps along railroad tracks across America served this from communal pots. Church soup kitchens served it. Mothers in tenement kitchens served it. The dish has no single inventor because half the country invented it at the same time out of pure necessity. Today, almost nobody under 60 has ever heard of it. Number 4. Pasta a fagioli, the Italian-American poverty masterpiece. 1 can of cannellini beans, 1 can of crushed tomatoes, a chopped onion, 2 cloves of garlic, a sprig of rosemary, 1 quart of water, 1 pound of small pasta like ditalini. Everything went in the pot. Everything cooked together until the beans softened and the pasta turned tender, and the broth thickened into something between a soup and a stew. A drizzle of olive oil at the end, if there was any. A heavy crack of black pepper, if there was not. The dish cost about 30 cents to make in 1937 and fed a family for 2 days. Italian grandmothers from Brooklyn to North Beach made this without measuring anything because their hands already knew. Today, restaurants charge $16 a bowl for the same recipe and call it a peasant dish, as if that is supposed to be charming. Number 3, peanut butter spaghetti. This is the one that sounds insane until you taste it. In 1934, the Bureau of Home Economics actually published a recipe for peanut butter spaghetti as a Depression dinner suggestion. The recipe was simple. A pound of cooked spaghetti was tossed with 3 tablespoons of peanut butter, a tablespoon of bacon grease, a splash of the pasta cooking water, salt, and a heavy crack of black pepper. The peanut butter melted into a creamy, savory, faintly sweet sauce that coated every strand of pasta. The bacon grease added smokiness. The starchy water emulsified the whole thing into something that tasted, against every expectation, exactly like a primitive version of a peanut sauce that Thai restaurants would charge $14 for 60 years later. A jar of peanut butter cost 12 cents. The dish fed 5 people for under 20 cents. Modern food bloggers are now rediscovering this and acting like they invented it. They did not. A government home economist did, and 1 million American mothers cooked it before any of us were born. Number 2, spaghetti carbonara, the Depression version. Long before fancy restaurants started charging $28 for it, Italian-American working families were making a stripped-down version of carbonara out of necessity. A pound of hot, drained spaghetti was tossed in a bowl with 2 beaten eggs, a heavy fistful of grated hard cheese if there was any, a tablespoon of saved bacon grease, and an aggressive amount of black pepper. The heat from the pasta should cook the eggs into a silky, glossy sauce that clung to every strand. There was no pancetta. There was no guanciale. There was no white wine. There was just bacon grease, eggs, pepper, and pasta. The dish cost under 20 cents to make, and it tasted rich enough that nobody at the table felt poor. Italian grandmothers in the Bronx made this on Tuesday nights without ever calling it carbonara. They just called it eggs and spaghetti, and that was enough. Number 1, bean and macaroni soup. At the top of this list is the meal that fed more American families through the Great Depression than any other pasta dinner ever made. A pound of dried navy beans soaked overnight, simmered for 2 hours with an onion, a stalk of celery, a clove of garlic, and a piece of salt pork, or a ham bone if there was one. Half a pound of elbow macaroni dropped in for the last 12 minutes. Salt, pepper, a splash of canned tomato if there was any, served in deep bowls with a slice of bread for dipping. The whole pot cost about 25 cents to make in 1935 and fed a family of 6 for 2 full days. The beans gave it protein. The macaroni gave it bulk. The salt pork gave it depth. This was the dish that kept American children alive through the worst years this country has ever lived through. Italian families called it pasta fagioli. Polish families called it bean soup. Appalachian families called it supper. By any name, it was the meal that did the most for the least, and the meal we have most thoroughly forgotten. Here's my challenge. Make one of these this week. Just one. The peanut butter spaghetti, the macaroni and tomatoes, the cabbage and noodles, or the bean and macaroni soup. Cook it without apology. Eat it at a real table with a real plate. Then tell me in the comments which one you tried, because I made the Hoover stew last Sunday, and it tasted better than anything that came out of a jar in the last 10 years. If you want the full collection, I made a cookbook with 100 simple meals from this era, and the link is in the description below. Drop the recipe you are going to try in the comments. I want to know if the peanut butter spaghetti gets more love than the cabbage and noodles. Because these were not just dinners. They were the proof that a kitchen with almost nothing in it could still feed a family with everything that mattered.